For those of you joining us again, I'm Megan Noel. I lead our global pre-sales organization at Amplitude. I'm your host for this room, and we're trying to stay on schedule, so thank you for your for your attention. Next, I'm going to be bringing on two speakers, Blake Bartlett and Kyle Poyar, to talk about something many of us know and love, product-led growth, and more specifically, how to benchmark where your company is at in its journey. Before I bring them up, I want to share a little background to set the stage. Blake Bartlett joined OpenView in 2013 and has led investments in companies like HighSpot, Calendly, Expensify, PostScript, and Cypress, among others. In 2016, Blake coined the term product-led growth, so you have him to thank, and continues to be a thought leader in the community as it's embraced PLG as the future of software. You can follow Blake on LinkedIn to watch his daily PLG news show called the PLG 123, which I followed. Also, Kyle Poyar leads OpenView's growth team, responsible for advising portfolio executive teams on strategies to increase revenue growth and dominate their markets. His team helped the portfolio generate over $100 million in additional enterprise value in the last 3 years. Kyle is an expert in product-led growth, optimizing go-to-market strategies, and SaaS benchmarks. You can check out Kyle's thoughts on SaaS growth by subscribing to his newsletter, Growth Unhinged. I'm excited to hear from this dynamic duo. Please help me welcome OpenView partners Blake Bartlett and Kyle Poyar.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. We're here to talk about benchmarking product-led growth, which is going to introduce a little bit of the framework that we use at OpenView to define what are the pillars of product-led growth, how do you do it, what's a framework for executing this strategy, and then per the benchmarks aspect, how is the industry stacking up against these best practices? How are folks adopting these things within product-led growth? So we'll dive in here. A little bit of background on PLG. So setting the stage, FYI, it used to be really hard to adopt new software. It was like running a gauntlet to get a new product into your organization. It took a lot of people through a long sales process, complex implementation, oftentimes even formal training and certifications before you could ever even get your hands on the keyboard and start using the product, which naturally took a lot of time. And it was, again, a gauntlet to get a new product into your organization. But as you all have probably realized, that's not really the case anymore. Today, software just kind of shows up unannounced in your organization. So quick show of hands. How many of these logos do you have in your organizations? Or how many of you have these logos in your organizations? I expect to see everybody. OK, yes. And you probably said, all right, when did this show up in our organization? Where did this come from? Was this an RFP we ran? And the answer is no. It just randomly showed up one day because somebody found it. And this is the new norm. End users are finding these software products, and then they're telling their boss which ones to buy. And so the power dynamic in terms of software procurement has completely inverted. It used to be that the boss told everybody else what product we're going to use. Hey, folks, this is the new system we're going to use, and you know what? It probably is going to be used for the next 5 to 10 years. And if you don't like it, well, tough, because it took a long-ass time to get here. So we're going to use it. But now, the end users are finding these products, and they're telling their boss, all right, this is the one we're going to use. We tried all the other ones. We've standardized on this one. Here's how we're using it. We've been doing it for months. We love this thing. We can't live without it. So here's the contract. Please sign it. So again, everything is completely inversed in terms of how software shows up in the organization. We call this the end user era. End users are now the gatekeepers to getting software into a customer account. And it changes software fundamentally. And the best SaaS companies out there recognize this, and they're embracing this end user era. These are some quotes from recent S1s a couple of years back. And Atlassian said that we recognize that users drive the adoption and proliferation of our products. Dropbox said that bottom-up adoption within organizations has been critical to our success as users increasingly choose their own tools at work. And Zoom said that we grow through viral demand driven by individual users. And so you see it here, users, users, users. They've embraced and recognized the end user era. And product-led growth is how you adapt in the end user era. So when we coined the term product-led growth back in 2016, we came up with this definition. We call it the dictionary definition for product-led growth. And we can claim that because we invented the term. And so back then, and still relevant to this day, is that PLG is an end-user-focused growth model that relies on the product itself as the primary driver of customer acquisition, conversion, and expansion, as opposed to human effort from your sales and marketing team alone. So what's the primary driver of your go-to-market motion? In PLG, it's the product itself. So we're in the end-user era. Product-led growth is how you adapt. So how the heck do you do product-led growth? What's involved in this? We've identified 5 core pillars, the basic fundamentals of product-led growth and embracing the end-user era. You have to build for the end user. Then you have to distribute where users live. You have to distribute for discovery. You have to make it easy to get started, deliver value before the paywall, and then ultimately hire sales last. So we'll unpack each of these and then talk about the benchmarks relative to them. The first one is building for end users. When you're building a product, you need to be specific about the persona of the primary product persona that you're building for. There's no such thing as a generic user. And identifying, is the person we're building for, is it the actual user of the product? Or is it the boss that runs, is it the executive that runs that department? Because they think about pain and they think about problems on their team very differently. Executives wake up in the morning and think about ROI, KPIs, business value, business cases, et cetera. And end users don't wake up in the morning thinking about that. They think about, what do I have to do today and how difficult is it going to be to do that? If you're an SDR, in this case, I hate scheduling meetings. I'm an SDR, I'm gonna have to schedule a lot of meetings today and that's gonna be a pain in the butt. Or if I'm a recruiter, I'm gonna have to schedule a lot of meetings today and that's gonna be a pain in the butt. And that's very different than executive pain, which might sound something like, we need to manage our sales process in order, or manage our sales pipeline in order to hit our quota, this particular quarter and on into the future. And when there's, with end users, there is this dynamic of, you heard it in that kind of, I hate scheduling meetings. It really is annoyance. And everywhere you look, there is this end user annoyance. And it's easy to overlook that annoyance and just kind of view it as an eye roll or something you might just hear over the water cooler from a coworker and overlook it and just solve for that business value. But at the end of the day, annoyance is opportunity. There's a bunch of examples here of things that people found annoying and that there's big companies and really impressive products that were built to replace that annoyance.
All right, well, now let's talk about benchmarks. So we're all familiar with SaaS metrics, SaaS benchmarks, know them, love them. But at OpenView, we kept getting all kinds of questions from our portfolio companies. Questions like, what's a good conversion rate? Or what does good activation look like? And so a couple years back, we started our annual product benchmark survey. This year, we've partnered with Amplitude on it. We've reached 450 different software companies who contributed data. And you guys are getting a sneak peek of the data before it's actually live. It's not going to be released for another 2 weeks. And so this is the only chance that you have to get it. And when it comes down to building for the end user, the metric to focus on is what share of your website visitors become free accounts, right? And so if you're solving for a strong enough user pain, folks will be willing to go through the hassle of giving you their email because they want to jump in to the product and see if it actually works for them. When we look at the data, we find that free trial companies get about a 4% conversion rate of website visitors to become free accounts. Freemium companies do a little bit better. They get 6%. And we, this year, added a third category to the data set, what we're calling Standout Plg Companies. Now, these are companies that you probably have heard of. They're recognizable logos, generating 100 million plus ARR and growing quickly. They do a little bit worse than the average freemium company. Our working hypothesis around this is that they've gone from reaching the early adopter crowd to mass market adoption. And so it's just going to be natural that conversion rates probably go down a little bit over time.
So you've built a product for the end users. Now you need to distribute to those users where they live and how they think. And when you're solving for executives, they think much more in a traditional sense of where am I going to discover a product? Things like analysts with Forrester and Gartner and others, or maybe going to an industry-wide trade show and walking the halls and visiting every booth, or responding to outbound prospecting because it aligns to a problem that you actually have in your organization. But end users, really in many ways, end users are like consumers, but there just happen to be consumers who are at work. And so if you're distributing to end users, consumers at work, you need to think like a consumer. And so you, as a consumer, you're not looking for a product from analysts. You go to an app store, or you go to a marketplace. You know, the Chrome Web Store as an example, the iOS App Store as an example, the Slack App Store, many others. Or perhaps you're using a platform today and you're looking for integrations or extensions and ways to power up your experience. And so you look at a marketplace for that platform, and there's marketplaces popping up everywhere. And of course, there's good old trusty Google, but it's not necessarily to find content or a webinar to go into a long consideration process. It's much more so, I have a specific problem, I'm looking for a specific solution, get me there as fast as possible, much more direct response-like in terms of the marketing strategy.
And the metric to look here is where do your signups come from? And so we asked about the share of new signups that come from different sources. And in this data, we're looking at paid sources like paid marketing or outbound sales-generated leads. The traditional sales-led software company generates about 2/3 of their signups this way. This is the way we're used to in software. What we find is that PLG companies generate only about 20 to 25% of their signups through these kinds of paid channels. You really can't rely on paid ads or outbound sales in a PLG business. It just doesn't work with how users find and want to buy products. The times when these channels do come into play tend to be around testing. For instance, testing new messaging or running campaigns to new audiences. They're not the core way of attracting an audience.
So another way to say this is that today products are discovered, not necessarily sold proactively. So how do you make yourself discoverable? How do you make your product a magnet that attracts prospects and users to it? Well, one strategy is using your product itself, and virality and word of mouth is a great place to start with that. So Calendly is a great example in our portfolio. We know and love them. How many people use Calendly here? All right, a lot of hands going up, that's good. If you don't use it, you should use it, it's awesome. But Calendly is inherently viral. You can't schedule a meeting with yourself, right? So if you're using Calendly and sending that link around, by definition, you're also helping to promote the product as well. And if somebody receives a Calendly link, goes through that wonderful scheduling experience, which is a lot better than the back and forth email experience to find a date and a time, you then discover the product by using the product, and you're probably going to sign up for it there. And so there's this inherent virality. Zoom has a very similar viral loop as well. But there's also then companies like Figma and Slack, which are leveraging collaboration. Figma's a great example. You see it here in the screenshot, that instead of driving collaboration out of band in Slack or in email, let's put the collaboration directly into the product. And so you have to sign up for the product. You have to keep coming back to the product if you want to be a part of the conversation. And so there's these viral loops or these collaboration hooks in every product, and they just look a little bit different from product to product. So identify them and capitalize them to make capitalize on them to make your product a distribution channel for yourself.
And if you're like me, when you run into a problem as a user, you type it into Google, right? And so as a software company, you want to be found in the context of what folks are searching for. I think Zapier makes a great example of this. Zapier, for those who are not familiar, is an app-to-app integration platform. But they're not being discovered because folks are searching for app-to-app integration platform software companies, right? One use case of how they are discovered for us at OpenView, for example, is, hey, I've got this contact in Typeform. I've got to send it to HubSpot. I'm doing that manually today. Like, is there a way to automate it? Zapier's built out landing pages for every app they integrate with, every app-to-app integration, and every specific workflow that users are trying to do. And then from those landing pages, you can actually just click try it and solve that problem right then and there. This has been extremely effective for Zapier. They generate over 7 million website visitors a month, more than half of which come from organic channels like their landing pages. And so the benchmark here again is signups by channel, and we're looking at organic sources, so sources where you're not paying per lead. The best PLG companies have a disproportionate share of their signups coming from product invites, that viral loop that Blake talked about, as well as from organic search and SEO. And so collectively, those generate the lion's share of signups. Now, for the PMs or growth folks in this room, I'd say first off, product invites might be an area that you're sleeping on. It isn't usually as large of a driver of signups in the early years, but it becomes super important at scale, as you can see with the standout PLG companies. So think about where there's ways to add collaboration in your product. And on the organic side, you all are the ones who understand the users, what they're trying to do in the product. Make sure you're working closely with marketing to make sure that's translated into the landing pages you're building and how you're talking to that next customer that doesn't know about your product yet. Now, one bonus thing, Blake talked about how business users are really just consumers at work. And as consumers at work, they're often, like consumers anywhere, on their phones, on Instagram, on TikTok. An emerging opportunity is to lean into these channels. Now, no one's going to see an ad on TikTok and decide to request a demo for a software company, but they might try to sign up for your product. And so we're seeing about a quarter of PLG companies use Instagram ads, about 6 to 7% are on TikTok, another 15 to 20% are using paid influencers. And to me, this is an opportunity for PLG companies to really stand out and outcompete their traditional peers.
So now that you've built the product for the end user, you've made it easy to be discovered and created a magnet that attracts users, they're at your front door. Now you have to make it easy for them to get started. And in our experience, end users demand and expect self-service. On the left over here, you have a more traditional B2B buyer's journey that you request a demo, you talk to sales, you have to negotiate a contract, DocuSign an order form, and then wait for somebody on the vendor side to implement you, get you configured so that you can get off to the races. This produces an eye roll from end users. They don't want to go through this. This is friction. These are hoops you have to jump through in order to get using the product. So the answer is over on the right, stuff that looks a lot more like consumer journeys. And this is starting to proliferate in a big way in the enterprise these days. So you sign up by just creating a username and a password, or perhaps social sign-on through your Google credentials, your Slack credentials, or something else like that. One click, accept the T's and C's. You get onboarded automatically, and everything from there continues to be very frictionless and very smooth. And so this is how you make it easy to get started.
Now, the metric to look at here is activation rates. Now, show of hands, who all has an activation metric they're tracking right now? Okay, see a lot of hands that are not up, so focus on this. Product activation really just means that you're solving the problem for a user that brought them to your product in the first place, right? They get to their aha moment. These activation metrics are going to be different from every product depending on what your product does. Standout PLG companies almost universally have an activation metric, but it's still something that's not fully adopted, especially in companies like free trial businesses or sales-led businesses. And when we look at the data, only about 20 to 30% of new users reach activation in even these standout PLG companies. And so even these top upper echelon companies will have dedicated folks, dedicated teams who are just tweaking with and testing different onboarding flows to drive faster time to value. And so if you're not tracking this metric, start tracking it. And even if you are already tracking it, there's a lot of room to continue to improve your activation rates.
So you've built the end user product, you made it easy to get discovered, it made it easy to get started, and now let's talk about monetization. You're going to want to deliver value first before users hit the paywall. If you put the paywall before the aha moment, if you put the paywall before the activation happens for that user's journey, you get a couple people to convert, really high intent people who already know something about your product, but you're really going to have a fairly low conversion rate. How many Spotify users in the house? I am a massive Spotify user, and I've been a paid user for years now, and I've never thought about churning once. I didn't start paid, though. I started free, found some music that I like, made a couple of playlists, started to discover some new artists, and I was like, wait, this is awesome. I want Spotify everywhere. I want to download the songs, et cetera, and I happily upgraded to paid from there. But I don't know if I would have done that. I've now spent thousands of dollars over the last number of years with Spotify through my subscription. I definitely would not have done that up front. And so deliver value before users hit the paywall, and you'll increase your conversion rate. Slack is a great example in B2B. They have their famous 10,000 messages, and you can get to 10,000 messages a lot of different ways, but by the time you get there, it's probably pretty much likely that your team has standardized on this. You're not going to go back to the dark ages of doing all internal communication over email, and so you're going to, again, happily pay once you hit that paywall to continue your experience and get an upgraded experience as well.
Now, the metric to look at here is conversion rate from that free account sign up to becoming a paid customer. And when we look at the data, conversion rates are 17% for the average free trial company, 5% for freemium, and 4% for the standout PLG companies. You might look at this data and say, wow, I just need to go with a free trial pretty much immediately. A couple things to think about before jumping into that. First is that remember that freemium companies tend to have a higher rate of folks who visit the website to create an account in the first place, and also more virality or kind of product invites as a marketing channel. So to the extent that you want more users to be trying out your product, sharing it with others, if your product increases in value the longer someone uses it, freemium tends to be a good option still. The other thing is that these two don't need to be separate. And so a number of really top emerging companies like Calendly and Airtable, have you start with a free trial for 14 days. You can see really the best features that product has to offer, things that you didn't even know that you needed, but once you're using, you don't want taken away from you. And then at the end of 14 days, you get dropped into just the standard free version. And what that does, it drives the urgency and feature discovery of a free trial business, while still allowing you to engage that long tail of users who need a little bit more time, like a freemium business does. And so I highly recommend contemplating if that type of reverse trial model would work for your business.
And the last pillar is the role of sales. When we first started talking about product-led growth back in 2016, there was a lot of misconceptions of, all right, if this PLG thing is really successful, does that mean that every salesperson is out of a job? The answer was no, and continues to be no. There very much is a role for sales in product-led growth. It just looks a little bit different. In the old world, you had to hire sales first, because how else are you going to get customers? And then you implement those customers, and then you support those customers once they're using it. But in PLG, the order of operations is directly inversed. You get the users first. And what do users need? They need support, so you hire that. And then as you go from users to teams, they're going to need things like, what is the team's plan, and how is it different than the individual plan? How do I migrate to that and use it optimally? I also probably want to move from a bunch of swiped credit cards to an invoice, and that sounds like a good job for success. And then as you go from small teams to larger teams, perhaps even whole departments, or maybe if you have the right kind of product, wall-to-wall in an organization, no matter how frictionless your journey is, you're not going to self-serve your way to a six-figure contract. You're not going to self-serve your way to a seven-figure contract. You're going to have to go through IT and security reviews. You're going to hit procurement. You're going to have to show the business value and the ROI calculator and all that kind of fun stuff, which again is a great job for sales. So you hire sales last to help the champion at the customer navigate through their own buying journey to get to the intended destination, which is a shared destination of using more of my product so that you get the value and so that we get the customer.
In PLG, sales looks a lot more like customer expansion. A great example is Zoom. And Zoom in their S1, they said that their customers that are spending more than 100 grand, their enterprise, high-value customers, more than half of those started out with a single free user. Now imagine if Zoom had a salesperson call every single free user. My grandma would be getting a lot of phone calls. Probably wouldn't convert very well. But instead, they can actually look at their data, right? They can see when's the right time and which folks and which accounts are most ready for a sales interaction. And so by taking that product data, they're actually able to improve the sales process and drive better conversion rates and a better customer experience. And we call this product qualified leads, or PQLs. And it's really just as simple as using your product data to sell. It turns out Standout Plg Companies are very likely to have a PQL playbook, but the average software company isn't. Only 45% of freemium companies and 42% of free trial folks have this concept of a PQL in their business. Now, the best companies can take PQLs really far, can have a whole playbook with different PQL types and playbooks for how to handle each of them. But you don't have to start that complicated. You can start even in a simple way, right? As soon as you hit 5 users in the same account, maybe the sales rep gets notified and you have a course of action that they should take, and then build more PQLs from there. So to wrap up here, if you want to be like the companies we've talked about, like the Slacks, the Zooms, the Twilios of the world, these companies are all in on product-led growth. They're talking about it in their S1s. They're targeting that user. They're demonstrating value before putting the commercial transaction or the paywall in place. And then they're expanding from that kind of groundswell of user love. And they're doing it not just because PLG is trendy, although I personally think it is pretty trendy. But they're doing it because it works. When we look at the data, even in this current down market for software companies, PLG companies, the leading PLG companies have faster growth rates, even at pretty significant revenue scale. That's driven by best-in-class net retention, so they're able to land and expand their customers. And they have really efficient go-to-market motions. Their Rule of 40, which is that combination of growth and profitability, is double the Rule of 40 of traditional software companies. So they're growing faster and more efficiently. The market is rewarding them with 80% higher revenue multiples. So it's pretty clear the end user era is here. PLG is how you adapt. Hopefully this data helped you see where are the best places to adapt and evolve your PLG strategy. Definitely check out the product benchmarks in a couple weeks when we drop them. And in the meantime, you can follow Blake and myself on LinkedIn for the latest PLG insights. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.